This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is Angelo Antonioni's Blowup. It's a classic film, and I'll be talking with three people who will tell you why it's great. Blowup is the film, and Michelangelo Antonioni was its director. My three guests will be introducing themselves in a bit. So, Gordon, if I could just ask you, you've been on a few times before. If you give a little background about yourself and what interests you about this film in particular.
Hi, my name is Gordon Briggs. I'm an English instructor at University of Rio Grande. My first experience with Blow Up, strangely enough, comes from watching the De Palma reimagining first. I had seen Blow Out first and not knowing that it was kind of a reimagining of Blow Up. So in the liner notes, I looked up and this was a remake. And I want to say a couple of years later, sometime in my mid-20s, I watched Blow Up and was really impressed with it. So ironically, I was one of those guys that watched the remake first and then went back and watched the original.
Yeah, a lot of people were that way too. In Blow Out, though, does it end in any similar way to Blow Up? Because it's been many years since I watched the Travolta.
Blow Out really it's a different type of movie.
Yeah.
The ending is not the same, and the Travolta character is not the same at all as Antonioni's character.
Yeah.
So the ending is Blow Out, the Travolta film, is more of a traditional thriller, like a run, chase, heightened tension thriller, and it's set in the world of audio, not in the world of photography.
And so therefore it's more actually sort of, I always thought it was more similar to, in some ways, The Conversation, the Coppola film.
Yeah. Well, The Conversation and Blowout to me are both children of Blow Up.
Yeah.
They're both kind of influenced by Blow Up. And Blow Up to me seems a bit more influenced by Rear Window a little bit. I'm not sure. But they're both movies are about photography. But I'm actually part of the generation that watched the 70s movies that came out after Blow Up rather than the original. But I've come to appreciate the original a great deal.
Ian, as Bolton on the right side of the screen, upper right, could you give a little bit of background about yourself and what drew you to this movie?
Yeah, my name's Ian S. Bolton. I live in the UK. I'm a photographer and I do location hunting, a bit of location scouting as well. I actually run a business with my wife, which takes up most of my time, but in my spare time I do the photography, a bit of drone filming, photography, that sort of thing. Blow Up first came to my notice when I was a teenager, and it was on British TV. And it was something I would catch in the evening when mum and dad were out, and I was babysitting my younger sister. And I saw it several times over the years and just thought it was just so enigmatic, so different from anything else I'd seen before. And I'm a location guy, so over time I went hunting the locations because obviously I lived in the UK, I lived in London, so they were easy for me to find physically. And that's it really, that's how I started with it. I've gone on to build a website with all the locations and stuff on it as well, which you probably know. And that's it, that's how I came to be introduced to it.
And Ian, you said you use drones for photography?
Yes.
Well, there's a good premise for the 21st century. There was that old British film, Peeping Tom. You could have a drone guy just filming people through their windows.
Absolutely, yes.
On the bottom of the screen,
I'm
sorry. On the bottom of the screen, Chadwick Jenkins. If you could give a little bit of background about yourself as well as your opening volleys about this film.
Okay, I'm a music professor at the City College of New York and also at the CUNY Graduate Center, and I mostly work on the relationship between philosophy and music, both classical music and popular music. I also do a good bit of film criticism, mostly for a website called Pop Matters. And so that's how I came to write about Blow Up. The reason I saw Blow Up the first time was I was a fan of the trilogy, the Antonioni trilogy, and knew those films quite well. When I was in high school and early college, I was obsessed with art film, basically, and I still am. And so those films, of course, are films that people feel like they ought to see. I think they ought to see them, and that led me through the Red Desert and then to Blow Up. So, and that's a period of Antonioni's films that I find philosophically rich, as well as just rich to see. I'm excited to speak with Ian, because I agree that the locations and the way that they're shot, the way that the wind works through the trees, I mean, he really involves himself in the area of London and Marion Park and so on. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
And I just noticed Ian has a background from the film there.
It's half film and half one of my photographs merged together.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
The gates are my picture, and obviously the crowd are from the film.
So before we get right onto the film, I just ask about Antonioni, because in thinking of, I'm doing this series, and I'm doing with one film at a time. Like I did 2001 for Kubrick, but I could have done a few other films. With this film, it came down to, with Antonioni, it came down to 3 for me: La Notte, Red Desert, or Blow Up. And I went with Blow Up simply because I think it went the farthest philosophically of the 3. So let me just ask you before we get started, Gordon, do you? I think we all agree that this is a great film. Do you think it is the greatest of Antonioni's films?
Oh, geez, what a question. Well, here's what I'll say about Blow Up. I think Blow Up is just one of the films, if you're a cinephile, it's just one of the films you have to deal with. It's just one of those films you have to know, like a Citizen Kane or something like that. So, I love the Ventura. I love Red Desert. Red Desert has one of the most unique looking places you've ever seen in a movie. And I'll even defend Zabriskie's Point. I'll even defend that movie. Zabriskie's Point has one of the best explosions ever filmed in a movie. Okay? But I just think there's just so much in Blow Up, as far as photography, as far as history, as far as, representations of sex. There's just so much there in the movie that I think if it's not, like I always say when I'm asked questions about best or worst, if it's not the best, it's definitely in the conversation. How about that? How about that? So it's probably in the conversation as Antonioni's best.
How about you, Ian? Do you think it's the best of Antonioni's films, or what?
It's definitely my favourite. Definitely my favourite. I like The Passenger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that intrigues me a lot. But as for calling it the best, then yeah, Blow Up is.
How about you, Chadwick?
I guess I'll be the contrarian. No, I don't think it's the best. I like it a lot. I think that it's a great entry level into what Antonioni's doing. I think that it's more accessible than a lot of his films. But for me, it would be a tie between L'Éclise and Red Desert. Those two are the ones that I go to over and over again. The architectural shots in The Eclipse is just one of the high moments for me in cinema, period. But don't get me wrong, Blow Up is a wonderful, great film, and it does a lot of important things, I think. But as far as like really, and it's funny because you didn't even mention L'Éclise, right? As one of the things that you.
I think it's a great film, but to me the top 3 are the ones I named.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So one of the things when I did my own review of the film is, and what really annoys me is every so often you get a film where something outside of the film sort of becomes canon. And here they call, a lot of people say, the photographer's name Thomas. We never hear his name. In the actual film, there is no name. He is never called by a name. This was just liner notes from an earlier screenplay. What do any of you disagree with that? Or because I think part of his anonymity, that he doesn't have a real name on actual film, is a important part of that film.
I have a copy of the original script, and it does name his character as Thomas, and the female interest as Jane. So they're actually mentioned in the script, but like you say, they're not mentioned in the actual film at all, or addressed as such.
Okay, so let's open with the film then. We get the idea the photographer is some kind of a journalist, because he seems to be doing a magazine article initially as he comes out of a flop house, it looks like, about the lower classes, the class system or whatever in the UK. So maybe Gordon, if you want to talk about the opening scenes that establish who the photographer is, because he's established as a fairly unlikable kind of character.
What was strange to me watching it again was I actually had to look up what a DOS house was. That he's in this DOS house, and what is a DOS house? And this whole idea that there are these, I guess they're not like shelters / hotels that you can just stay in for a night off the street for extremely low cost. So when he was getting out of this building, I assumed he was like a convict getting out of jail, and I assumed that he was this poor guy or a homeless guy who was down on his luck. But what's strange is he walks right from that house to his real house. So there's a huge shift, a huge swing in just his class identification in the first few minutes of the film. And he strips out of these kind of rundown working man clothes and gets into his buttons open, lightly colored T-shirt and starts to photograph them. The first thing that made an impression on me was when he starts to photograph that model, who apparently was a very famous model back when the movie was filmed. I can't remember her name.
Verushka, yeah.
There you go. Was just how aggressive he was with the camera. It was almost like the camera was an extension of his penis.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that in a vulgar way. I'm just remembering, you've all seen the cover, the poster to this movie, is this shot of the girl basically between his legs, him hovering over her with that camera, and almost kind of aggressive, give it to me, give it to me, yeah, give it to me, give it to me. And I'm like, first of all, what the hell is he shooting with this? Why is he being so aggressive? But he just came across as almost as if he was abusing, or he was using his camera as a sexual weapon. That's what I got from the character at the very, very start.
Chadwick, what's your take on the opening?
Well, a couple of things. First, I didn't think he was a journalist. I thought he was an art photographer, right? Because he's putting together a book of art photography, and some of it is this attempt to capture the real people, right? And that's why he's so excited about the park pictures, because it'll give a sort of happy ending. And his agent Ron says, "Oh, that's a good idea. That's the right move, is to have some kind of more graceful ending when there's all this sort of suffering throughout the most part of the book." I think Gordon's absolutely right about the scene with Verushka. I mean, there's even a sort of post-coital depression afterwards, right, where he collapses on the couch and he's like, I'm all spent, and she looks like, well, what just happened? It looks like this a very typical Antonioni love scene, even though they're not making love. But the same kind of things happen in a lot of his films, where people seem kind of disappointed after the actual moment of lovemaking is somewhat aggressive. That happens in the Red Desert, right? Did she really accede, the Vitti character, the Monica Vitti character, did she really accede to having intercourse, or was she more or less forced into it? And the same kinds of things happen in this film over and over again, right? I wanted very quickly, though, to go back to something Dan said about the names, right? The names, I think, are absolutely important. This is a film with very few names that are actually said in the film, right? Jane Birkin's character, whom I'm sure we'll talk about later, in the script is just called Blonde Girl, and her friend is Brunette Girl, right? We never learn the name of the people that run the antique store. We know Ron's name, the agent, and we know Bill's name, the painter, but so few other names are we actually given in the film. So it is this kind of strangely anonymous film, and I can't help but feel like that was intentional. That a name is a purchase on someone, and in this film we have a purchase on so few people.
Yeah. How about you, Ian? What are your takes on the opening of the movie?
I'd actually follow up on what Gordon said about when he leaves the DOS house. He actually runs down the road and he gets into his Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
So he goes from DOS house to Rolls Royce. A really wide gap between social classes. And he's in there, but he's not one of them. He's just pretending to be one of them to get the right shot. So it's quite cold and callous, I think, in the way he takes his photographs. There's a sort of a remove, if you like, from the real him to the subject matter he's taking photographs of.
So, as a photographer, what did you think of those scenes of from the 1960s with him taking the photographs, the overtly sexualized poses, and you know, the aggressiveness that Gordon mentioned?
Well, with Verushka, the photographers then were, well, they probably still are, were very powerful. They could make or break a model's career by saying, I don't want to work with you, or I don't want to work with you. So I think it's sort of an extension of that. It's power and control. And I think he doesn't care about wielding that power and using it to get the result he wants. Doesn't matter about the model, just he gets the picture.
Now, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I ask Ian a question real quick?
Sure.
So you said that you feel like he's more removed from himself when he's taking the photographs and less himself? Because I almost feel like it's the opposite. Like, that's when he's finally engaged.
No,
Like,
I mean,
it's in the park, right?
he's removed from the subject matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not himself, but from the subject matter. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, we're recording this in 2021 now, 55 years after the movie was filmed. Yeah, no, 56 after it was filmed, and 55 since it was released. And since you mentioned about the power that the photographers had, in retrospect, he sort of looks like a budding Harvey Weinstein, doesn't he? I mean, yeah, I mean, he has the little the trio with the two younger girls, the whole Verushka thing. Even once we'll get it to the Vanessa Redgrave. It's Vanessa, yeah, Vanessa Redgrave thing later. You know, she offers to sleep with him to get the photographs back. I mean, he's constantly being offered sex, and I wonder now in this post Me Too kind of era, what that says about the character, and could he get away with that today? Let me start with you, Ian, since you are a photographer.
I couldn't get away with it today, no. And I don't think he could. No, it's a different world now, for sure.
Chadwick, what's your take on that power structure that is implicit in the film between the photographer and the subject, and the male and the female?
Yeah, I kind of want to think a little more about it. In one sense, the camera's an interesting thing, right? Because you're playing for this mechanism that you know is taking you in, and you are posing for it knowing that it is capturing something of you. And so in a sense, you feel like you're setting up a framework for yourself, a way of representing yourself. But there's an eye behind that camera, right? And this fits in very well, I think, with Antonioni's view of reality, that there's always something behind everything that we see and everything that we think we're presenting ourselves toward, right? And so part of that power is the sort of power of the void, of endless possibility, of this thing that your image that you think you're in control of, that in a way you know you're not. Something else is taking it in, and it's part human being and part mechanism, you know, because there's a human behind the camera, obviously. And I think you're right that he wields a great deal of authority, and he uses that authority throughout the film. As far as whether he could get away with it today, I mean, the fact that there was a Harvey Weinstein means people are getting away with it today, so in various ways. So I imagine he could. It's hard to say that kind of thing about a fictional character. I don't know what he could get away with, but people are getting away with things and then coming to light, and I'm sure plenty of others aren't coming to light.
Gordon, what's your take on this sexual power politics?
Well, what's interesting is not being around in the 60s. Not being around in the 60s, I wonder if this scene is supposed to titillate an audience. That's the interesting thing to me. Because one of the things that has come out of this whole Me Too thing, as far as looking at movies, is, am I supposed to be titillated by the sexual degradation, exploitation of a woman on screen, at least in this respect? What I think Blowup identifies, what it nails, is that we are identifying this as sexual exploitation. It isn't done in a kind of James Bond way, where the woman's will is overcome. She's like, oh, I submit to you. There's a kind of sad and heartbreaking scene where Vanessa Redgrave offers herself to the character. And I think, at least this is how I view it, that we're supposed to not like him at this point. We're supposed to see it as a sexual objectification, that she doesn't want his body, she wants the photographs. Okay? It's an exchange that she's being offered him. So I think the movie kind of nails the exploitation there. What interests me as far as a viewer is that maybe Antonioni is setting up a kind of bohemian freedom that was happening in 1966, that people could have sex without consequences. I don't know if this is true, but Michael Myers said that this is one of the films he watched when he was preparing the Austin Powers movie. That he was watching this, and that this character and this idea of this sort of free and open sexuality was a part of the time period. So I don't have a definitive yes or no answer. What I would say is I think I cannot take pleasure in the sexual exploitation like maybe an audience could in 1966. But as I said, Vanessa Redgrave, I don't think we're supposed to take sexual pleasure in at least some of these scenes.
Right. Including the scene with the two young girls, right? I mean, they want to make it. They show up twice. They throw themselves at him in one sense. And then he even says at one point, speaking of names, as Dan brought up before, right? He says, what's your name? To the brunette. She doesn't answer right away. He goes, oh, what does it matter? What do I care about your names, right? And then he I mean, it gets
Chadwick, did he rape? Did he? It's
a little rapey, right? It gets a little like he's yanking her clothes off, and then he makes it into a tickle fight or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it feels a little rapey. And then at the end of it, of course, they get up and he gets interested in his prints again. And he says, oh, get out. And they're like, what? I thought we were taking photographs. Oh, I'm too tired. And it's your fault, right? How is it their fault? I mean, he's the one that attacked or seduced, if you want to put a prettier picture on it, them. How is it their fault that he's too tired to take pictures, which we know he's not anyway, because he's about to get to doing more work. So
before we get to the main plot of the film, where he goes to the park and we get to the mysterious stuff, for me, the key setup scenes is right before that, when after the little orgy here, he decides to go off because he's bored. His life seems to be empty. He's a control freak in a lot of ways, but he goes and he goes to a bric-a-brac shop, or whatever you want to call it, and he ends up buying this old propeller. I think it's from an old-fashioned aeroplane, just for the hell of it. And it's one of those things, he has the money that he can afford to do that kind of thing, but it seems to me that, and we'll get into it as we go farther in the film, that he's constantly trying to fill himself up with something, because he seems to me a very bored character, as well as he has this kind of, at the start at least, some kind of malevolence to him. He reminds me a little bit of a more toned down little Alex from A Clockwork Orange. So maybe, Chad, if you want to start, what did you get from that particular scene where he goes and gets the propeller?
Well, for me, there are a couple things, right? There's the unfinished quality of the film, and Ian obviously has a copy of the script, so he can probably tell us even more about that than I can. But supposedly, according to interviews with Ronan O'Casey, who plays the murder victim, in various interviews he gave, he says, oh, well, there was this whole explanation of the mystery eventually, and it feels like there's a lot of things that are sort of gestured toward without being finished, and that seems one of them, right? Because he's there for a reason. He says he's there for the guy that smokes a lot of cigars. I can't figure out if it's supposed to be Ron or what, but it's someone that he works with that wants to buy that shop, and he's trying to see if it'll come down in price. So there's this whole little world that's sort of gestured toward that never gets fleshed out. And part of that, I think, is something that when Antonioni supposedly ran out of funds, and that's why he didn't follow all these threads out. But in a way, I think that part of it is an aesthetic choice, because the film, it seems to me, a big part of it is about form and content. right? It's about and how content sort of disrupts form, and form kind of washes over content in various ways, right? So you can't have one without the other. We know that since Aristotle, right? And yet there's a way in which they're pulling at each other constantly. And the propeller seems to me like a good example, right? He's taking this thing that is a part of something. It is this beautiful sinuous form, in a sense. And he eventually goes home and discusses with the Vanessa Redgrave character, Jane, discusses where they're going to put it. And he says, she says, it'll break up the symmetry of the room, right? So there's this notion of how form works here. What the content of that is for him, is he going to use it for his own photographs? Why is it that he wants it, and he wants it immediately, right? He says to the woman, I have to have it today. And he tries to shove it in his car, and she says, oh, you can't abuse your car like that. He goes, well, if you bring it to me, make sure it's today, right? And then when it shows up, he's like, oh, you're here? There's this strange way in which he's very dedicated to the idea of this kind of pristine form, and yet that's unsatisfying to him, right? And to me, that's the whole message of the movie, is that he talks to Bill. Bill says, oh, I find something in my paintings, and then it all comes together, and I pursue that thing, right? He doesn't say that I just see it, and it all illuminates. He says, I have to pursue it. I see the trace of the leg. I keep working with it. I keep working with it. Something emerges to me, and it all comes together and makes sense. And to me, that's what the propeller is. It's, again, this sort of form that then he tries to find ways to make content out of, or tries to find ways to trace content through.
Gordon?
I thought about the propeller scene so much, but, it's strange. He has this neat, sleek, modern apartment. Then he goes down to this antique store. So I thought, okay, here's another wild change in circumstances. And he's supposed to be happy in his sleek, sexual den, but all he wants to do is get out and go to get some antiques. Coming off of what Chad said, this is something that has a certain purpose, and he takes that purpose of the propeller and he puts it into a whole different context. So I think one of the things the movie is about is sort of he has these images, but now he has to create a story, or he has to find the story. He's a filmmaker without a story. What I think is interesting is his friend is an abstract art painter. Mm-hmm. I guess kind of a Jackson stuff. And his paintings are these little bitty dots. And when he blows up his photographs, he finds images in that little bitty dots. Okay? If you want to get into the philosophical thing here, here's what I think is interesting. It would be a philosophical existential crisis if he wasn't sure if there was a murder or not. But we know there was a murder, right? We know there's a dead.
Actually, we don't know there's a murder. I guess it depends on how much you feel you need to see in order to know, right? Because we don't know body. We know there's a dead body. Yeah.
There's a dead body in the park.
Right.
And then the body is removed. So we know for certain that there's a dead body.
Right.
So the reason and the circumstances of that dead body are never made known to us. But at least for me, this is one of the questions I had. He knows for sure that there's a murder that happened, doesn't he? He knows for sure he saw something. And in a job and in a profession where he's constantly taking pictures and creating artificial things, he finally has something real and definitive that he's seen not with his camera, but he's seen with his own eyes. If that makes any sense. It's vanished by the end of the film, and he has no proof of it, but the audience knows. We know, don't we, that he actually saw that body. This thing actually happened. So I always wonder, it's like, I think Antonio is going to get what is real, what is the meaning of reality, and all that stuff. But I always think, like, wait a minute, we know that there's actual body here. We know this thing happened. So how is this triggering a crisis for him?
Ian, what's your take on this all? The whole diversion, I guess we call it, to the antique shop for the propeller.
The antique shop, the propeller. I mean, I guess as a photographer, he is always looking for inspiration, objects to photograph or use in some way. That's the creative in him, I guess. I feel that he's quite easily diverted from his course. I assume he's going to the shop to help aid negotiations in buying that shop. But at the end of it, there doesn't seem to be any progress made, really, and he comes away with a propeller. For one, for want of a better explanation. It's just weird. I think it's some sort of diversionary tactic. It takes us away from what was our thinking that the plot was, that he was going there to help aid that purchase. The other thing is he wants that immediacy, he wants that propeller delivered today, and that goes back to the power aspect, I think, that if he wants something, he wants it now. You know, tomorrow's not good enough. He'll have lost interest in it by then. So there's a bit of that as well. That sort of takes over from his original idea of going to the shop to help buy it. That's how I see it. Going back to the dead body, I always feel that convention is that if we, the audience, see something on the screen, it's real. But I think Antonioni changes that. He shows us something that we think is real, but it might not be real. It might just be in the photographer's head. So I'm still not sure about the dead body.
Right? Zabriskie Point's a great example of that. The villa doesn't blow up. That's her wish fulfillment there.
It's true. Oh, okay. Well, I have to reevaluate the whole film if the body's not.
I don't know. I sort of think that the body's probably real, but I don't know that we know that there's a murder. And remember, you sort of make it seem like it's an assumed fact throughout that the body's there, but it's not. Because remember, at first he thinks he stopped a murder, and that's what he tells Ron. He goes, "I'm a hero. I stopped the murder. This is perfect for my book," right? So the narrative that he's building through most of the film, until he goes to see that body, is that, well, until he sees the little alien form that he blows up and thinks that maybe that's a body, which, by the way, is the least convincing bit of photographic evidence, right? I mean, why is it that the face, at first you can't tell what it is at all, then all of a sudden you see the thing that's the most clear is the gun, right? It looks like it's like painted onto the thing. It looks ridiculous. It's not blown up the way the rest of it is. It doesn't fuzz out. But the body looks like something like extraterrestrial files. It doesn't look real in any sense. It's all these patches. It does wind up looking like bills. I want to say one more thing, because Ian made me think again about that scene. Remember that scene's in two parts at the antique shop. The first time there's an old man watching the antique shop, then the young woman that supposedly owns the thing. The old man is a good example of the kind of conversation that happens in a lot of Antonioni films, but in this one especially, almost to the point of decadence. Like it happens over and over again, where people are kind of talking to each other, but they're negating everything they're saying. So he says, "Oh, I came here looking for photographs. There are no photographs." Then he pulls out all these photographs and he puts them somewhere. I came here for landscape paintings. Then there are no landscape paintings, and he moves a few busts, and there's a landscape painting. And points to another and another. You know. So and the main character, Thomas, or the photographer, whatever we want to call him, does this over and over again with the scene in Jane, for instance, where he says, "Oh, my wife's on the phone." "Well, it's not really my wife. We just have kids." "Well, we don't really have kids. It just feels like we have kids." "Well, we're not really in love. She's just easy to live with." "Well, no, she's not easy to live with because that's why we don't live together." So he negates everything he says, and you see this over and over again in his conversations. I'm sorry, Gordon.
I'm sorry. That scene, it's like my wife is calling, but she's not really my wife. We live together. I guess me not liking her is the reason why we didn't be together. So even you're getting character there, but you're not even sure if he's lying or not.
Right.
I wrote in my thing, I was like, is he even telling the truth about who this was?
Right. And he does it again and again when he's talking to the Sarah Miles character and he's telling, "I saw a murder tonight." And that's where, Gordon, you say, "Well, look, he said, I saw a murder." But then he goes, "Well, I didn't see it." Right. I mean, he constantly is taking things back. And of course he didn't see it. He didn't see a murder. And so, you know, it's a lot about not what he did, what he saw, but rather what he was able to negotiate out of this process. And I think that's what's so interesting about the film is that central scene. Everyone loves that central scene, and something very similar happens in the conversation. And I don't know Blowout as well, but the process scene, the scene where he's actually doing the work and you see him going through the work, and that should be boring as hell, and it's not, because we see him engaged and trying to sort of massage reality into something that makes sense to him.
Well, a couple of points before we move on, I just wanted to make was I think this film, what Ian said, I know the article he's talking about from the actor who played the Stiff, and it reminds me of I think it was Manhattan, Woody Allen's Manhattan, which was originally supposed to be a murder mystery that later, 15 years later, became Manhattan Murder Mystery. But it's so much better that he dropped that. And I think this film is much better for the dropping of the murder mystery angle because, too often people will tell you, especially in creative writing classes, you need to flesh out your story. You only need to tell enough to tell whatever story is you're telling. I think it adds to the story that he's going to go and there's some plot outside. If he had gotten a phone call on his car phone there from his Aunt Ruby reminding him to come to church service next Thursday for his Uncle Walter's whatever, that would have been interesting. We don't have to know what is happening in the rest of his life, just what's in this thin little vein that's going. And the second thing I wanted to talk about was for the corpse. That's a mighty pristine corpse there that we find. It's right. At night. He looks like he's been perfectly made up as if he's been pulled out of a casket. If he was violently bludgeoned or shot, there'd be the green marks from the grass, from the dirt and whatnot. So I think we're not really sure if that's a real body because or if it was that planted that we don't have any idea really what the provenance was.
Was the body even shot or anything?
Yeah.
Like that? It's never made clear.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the scenes at the park. After he has met with his agent, he goes to the park because he's bored. He wants to photograph things, and he seems to have been. There seems to be someone following him. So this is the mid-'60s. This is James Bond era. This is the era of all that kind of stuff. So for a moment, it seems as if he is a person of interest to some forces beyond that we know of. And then he just sort of stumbles into photographing the Vanessa Redgrave character and her presumed lover. So Ian, since we were just talking about the actual park there, how big a park is that? And is this up on a particular knoll? Is the knoll still there or what?
Yeah, it's not a huge park. I mean, the tennis courts that you see are really the main centre of that park. It was an old sandpit many years ago that got filled in, hence the sort of bowl shape that it presents. Sorry, I've forgotten the part of your question now.
Basically, just is it was it a big park? Is it still pretty much the same though? I mean,
it's pretty much the same. I mean, the fencing you see at the top of the knoll is still there. Sorry, that was your other point. Okay. The knoll is still there. It's a big geographical feature. It's actually one side of the bowl shape of the old sandpit from way back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've forgotten your point again. Sorry.
Well, before we dig further, I just want to bring up one other point that I haven't brought up yet, and that is sort of the Greek chorus effect of the mimes that appear a handful of times just riding around. Let me start with you, Chadwick. What is your take on what the mimes represent? Are they a Greek chorus of some sort?
Well, they're certainly a framing device, right? And Ian, I think, will probably be able to speak to this better than I can. But my understanding is that they're supposed to be an emulation of Rag Week, right? Of these university students going around asking for donations. If you remember when he first gets into his car, right after he's out of the DOS house, they're all running around manically, and he gives them a donation, right? And then we see them again at the end. And they're clearly meant to be a framing device. They're meant to be a juxtaposition of him coming out of that DOS house. They go by this this brutalist architecture right in the beginning when they go through that plaza, and no one else is there, right? Just these screaming mimes, which of course seems like a contradiction in terms, right? Mimes aren't supposed to be screaming, and I guess they're not exactly mimes, but at the end they're clearly supposed to be mimes, right? But again, they're not silent. They're screaming. They're not saying anything word-wise, anything articulate, but they're sort of yelling through while they're riding on that Jeep in the opening, and even when they come in on the Jeep at the end. And so this idea of the screaming mimes, this inarticulate attempt to communicate through the voice and then having to resort to gesture, I think is definitely a framing device for the film as a whole.
Ian, what is your take on the mimes?
Yeah, it's a strange one, really. Like Chad said, the tradition from universities at the end of the seasons, the semesters, whatever you call them, is for these charity collections, and they dress up with the white skin and the clothes and stuff, and they go out looking for money, basically. But they appear at the beginning and the end of the film, and like you say, at the beginning they're loud, they're raucous. They drive around in the Land Rover. But by the end of the film, the Land Rover's gone, so the noise of that is gone. And they're not talking anymore, they're not shouting, they're not shrieking. They are mimes. It's a weird sort of transition. Again, Antonioni being enigmatic, no doubt. But I find them, yeah, a very interesting subject, and I'm still not sure what they mean in this film.
Gordon,
but they change. I think there's a transition.
Gordon, what's your take on the mime characters?
I guess I'm the one who thinks that the mimes are the key to the whole thing. I think that the mimes are so interesting. Maybe it's because that final scene is what tipped the film over for me from being a very good film to being a masterpiece. The way that I interpret mimes, this is me coming, I know people watch these and they're not necessarily film scholars, but I'm going to throw out a word like indexical or indexicality. Just the whole idea that there is a tree and there's the picture of a tree. And because we have this picture of a tree, we assume that the photograph is true. Okay? And what this movie, I think, is highlighting and disrupting is that just because something is photographed does not mean that it has photographed truth, that you have to kind of create a story around it. What I think is happening with the mimes is that the whole arc of this photography character is he is someone who is self-consumed, self-involved, and becomes awake to the fact that there is a world around him where things happen. Once the body disappears, once the photographs disappear, once all evidence of the truth disappears, he's forced to go back into this world of artifice, of performance, of with the mimes. I think Plato called it mimesis, which is imitating reality. That's what the word mime comes from. That what I think he's forced to do, the punishment that he's forced to exude at the end, is that he's back into the world of artificial performance, even though he knows there's a world outside where the reality is. That he is forced to go into this sort of performance of life, even though that he knows that outside there's murder, there's corruption, there's something wrong. To me, I think that the mimes are just a nice way to highlight how artificial and fake his world was. And we know how artificial it is because we actually have mimes performing it now. And he's doing the exact same actions that the mime is by pretending to throw back a fake ball. I think it's a really, really interesting thing. And I just want to highlight one more thing that I think not only figures in with the mimes, but figures in with the context when the film came out. What the photographer is doing is exactly what I and a lot of historians have done with the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination. they have taken a piece of photography, the Zapruder film, and cut it, analyzed it, blown up certain sections of it, and to say, oh my God, you can see a man behind the picket fence. Okay? So it's trying, I think the film is doing this, really highlighting the time period it came out, but you could look at these images and create almost anything you want with them, any kind of story you want. So I think the ending with the mimes playing ball illustrates that he has been awoken to everything, that a world that's outside of himself, and now he has to go back to this world of performance. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, and it seems too that when he first takes the photographs of the woman and the man in the park, he's doing it in a voyeuristic sense because he thinks he's capturing someone who's having an affair, and maybe they are. And it's only once he starts blowing things up and he seemingly sees her looking at a figure with a gun that he seems something more sinister. But even at that, there's still no communication between these two seemingly real figures, because she asks for the film, he gives her another worthless film, and she gives him a false phone number, and things go on again. And as I mentioned, there seems to be someone who's looking at him or following him earlier in the film. So you get all of these kinds of threads that are coming together, and none of them ever seem to cohere. Chadwick, let me just start with you here. So after he has had the little tete-a-tete with the two girls, and he goes back, you had mentioned briefly, there's really a famous scene that a lot of people said is one of the most moments of pure cinema in film history, where he's sort of trying to he's blown up all the photographs, and he's trying to put them in a logical order and trying to figure out. And as you said, it's wordless. It's just image, 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 and you're inside his mind. You're the homunculus inside of his brain there. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that particular sequence? Because it's really a bravura sequence.
Well, yeah, it is a bravura sequence, and I think it fits with some of what Gordon was just saying. That what he's doing is he's trying to take these still images and he's making a narrative out of them, right? And so every glance becomes significant. Think about just hugging somebody, right? And all the various movements you're going to make. You can't look at them. Right? I guess you could look at the side of their head, but you're looking around various places. If each of those micro movements becomes significant or becomes read as significant, then that opens up all these various narrative threads, right? And he's this guy that we see over and over again disengaging from others. When he's the most engaged, it's when he's testing himself in his ability to read this thing that is partly his work and partly not his work. And I mean, again, I think Ian will speak to this more eloquently than I can because I'm not a photographer. But knowing basically how it works, right? You're taking a picture of something that you didn't set up. You might have framed it a certain way, or you might have moved things around in it. But for the most part, what you're doing is you're taking a picture of something that's outside of you, right? And you have a certain kind of mastery over that takes, it seems to me, two forms. And again, Ian, feel free to jump in and correct me at any moment. But it seems to me it takes two forms. One is the actual framing. I'm holding the camera up, I'm looking at something, and I'm deciding what's in and what's out, right? Which is something we do all the time. There's no such thing as a historical fact. Facts are things that we put in places to make sense that add up to something, right? We can say, oh, well, it's a fact that Napoleon lost at Waterloo, right? But there's all sorts of things that are part of that makes it, just the whole concept of losing is not a fact in a straightforward way, right? So first we have the framing of the thing. That's one form of mastery. The other form is the part that we're seeing in this bravura moment, which is the piecing together, the blowing up, the getting everything just right, getting the contrast right, all the rest, right? And so he's wrapped up in this moment of mastery where part of what he's trying to master is something that he did not himself set up, right? Something that was there that he's trying to capture through his mastery, this post hoc mastery, right? After having taken the picture, now we're examining what's there and how we can manipulate this thing, how it becomes fungible, how it becomes something that we can work with, right? And what he's working with is a way to get at something, right? By by sort of taking it apart. And we see things getting taken apart over and over again. The propeller is a partial object. The guitar neck is a partial object, right? The way he treats his car at various times. There are 2 times where he shoves things in his car so that the car's not exactly doing what it does, right? And those objects don't stay in there. The propeller is removed. The sign falls out, right, during the protest. So to me, that's what that scene is about, is this question of mastery. What mastery do we have over reality? Right? Can we just sort of see it and we know what's going on? Is it a certain matter of acculturation that we get used to how things work? But then there's always these moments of breakdown. And that's what we're seeing here, is he wants things to hold together. He's following Bill's advice, but it keeps slipping. When we get the picture of the corpse, it's just this motley, like I said, looks like something out of an extraterrestrial photograph, right?
Mm.
Ian, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I'm with Chadwick on that, really. What I find with this scene in particular is everything's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The detail is reducing, but he's making something bigger out of that detail. It's almost a bit like finding the body in the park, laying there straight, uncluttered, undamaged. Is what we're seeing what he's seeing in his head, in his mind, or is it reality? Again, the convention is that the camera show, if you see it on camera, it must be real. But to be honest, when he first starts blowing up the pictures, the detail in there isn't very much. But as you get deeper, instead of becoming fuzzier and blurrier, he's actually bringing precise detail out of that. And that is actually physically impossible to do, whether it be digital photography or analog. You can't do it. So I suspect that we're seeing what he wants to see in those pictures, in those hanging up pictures drying on the line or pinned to the wall, whatever.
And in a similar fashion, and I'll direct this to Gordon. So after he has given the false information to the Redgrave character, she goes off, and this is when he goes to the park, and as I said, he sees this very pristine corpse, seemingly, but because of he's given this false information to her, when he gets back, his whole studio has been ransacked. The only thing left is one of the blurry photographs. So it makes one wonder if this was, since she didn't get the information, did Redgrave go to her allies or whatnot, and knowing he was going to go back there, place a seeming body there? And so Gordon, what is your take on that whole sort of machination? Because he goes, he sees, it seems like it's just a big wild goose chase.
Yeah. First thing, when I watched them do the Blowup photography scene and examine the photographs, watching these films out of order, the first thing that popped into my mind was the scene from the film Blade Runner. I don't know if any of you guys seen this movie where he zooms into the photograph and then zooms into the reflection of a water bottle, I think, and then off that reflection of a water glass finds a crucial piece of information. I thought, okay, maybe Ridley Scott was influenced by Blow. Who knows? But he's getting to the most minute details of a photograph to find the answer. Secondly, I thought, what a terrific image. At the start of the film, the guy's home is filled with these shallow, modern pieces of art that maybe don't mean as much to him, anything. But now what's on his walls? The actual photos. Now his world is literally being decorated by not only art that means something, but something real, if it is real, if there is a murder. Okay? I don't know. When we see that gun, doesn't it look like a gun?
Yeah, too much.
Yeah, an old gun as well.
Yeah. You can't put in that kind of. That's what Ian was saying. You can't put in information when you're blowing up. Information only goes away. But when that picture, if you watch carefully, the moment where you see, before you see what he sees, there's that, he does that twice, right? Where he clearly sees something that we're not allowed to see yet. And he puts a box around it so that right? So before we see what he sees, and even when he first blows it up, I don't see anything there. The face, I see the bush. I don't see anything. And then all of a sudden there's the face kind of, and the gun's super clear, you know, which is impossible. So he's somehow putting in information in a way that you can't. Yeah.
A different movie would have said a gun, but it kind of just shows it to us, lets us into it. As to your question, Dan, I think Blow Up is a great movie about paranoia because the key to paranoia is you don't really see the thing coming at you. It's kind of all in your head. I think this will be more refined when we get into movies like The Conversation and Parallax View. If you guys seen Parallax View, or the 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where this whole idea that there's someone out to get you, there's someone following you, but you don't know what it is. So I think if I'm reading the movie correctly, that's where the paranoia is supposed to start. Is you don't know how big this conspiracy is. I mean, it could just be obvious that Vanessa Redgrave tracked him down somehow. I can't remember how. Yeah. Tracked him down somehow, and just had her conspirator just break into the house and take his photographs. So there might just be two people involved in this whole thing.
Well, you know. Sorry. Go ahead, Ian.
In the scene where the photographer's driving and he comes into the procession, or the demonstration, shall I say, and the placard gets put in the back of his car. As he turns the corner, you can actually see a car following him.
Yeah.
And Jane's in that car. It's a grey Rover, I think.
Okay.
The guy who tries to open his boot outside the restaurant is driving that car. So again, does he think he's being followed, or is he actually being followed?
Yeah. Well, you know, go ahead, Gordon.
Ian, I don't know the story with this about the dropped solution. Mm-hmm. Just out of curiosity, what was the conspiracy that we never got?
I don't think it ever comes to fruition. I don't think it's ever concluded on film.
In the script, they never say this was the explanation for it.
Sorry. The script I have is it's like a novelization of the film. They made the script from the film that was eventually released.
Yeah, Ian had mentioned there was an article online about the guy who played the stiff in the park, saying that there was a more Bondian like background to that, but it was dropped. But one thing that I and Ian mentioning the car following him, I do remember that, but I didn't recognize Vanessa Redgrave in the car, or maybe I missed it. But
yeah, she's a passenger seat.
Yeah, but what does remind me of is this was made a year before The Prisoner, the TV show with that came out, and that ends up possibly being all in his mind. You know, the prisoner who was John Drake in Secret Agent or Danger Man, as it was called in the UK.
Who is number one?
Yeah,
you are number 6.
Yeah, but I want to talk about the whole Yardbird sequence, because a lot of people and a lot of critics say it's a pointless sequence, but for me it's not, because just 2 years later, it to me in this film serves the same function as the Stargate sequence in 2001, because from the beginning to the end of that sequence, once you get past that sequence, there's really nothing real, I don't think, that's going on there. I think we have totally gone over into whatever is in the mind of the photographer, because he goes after his studio has been ransacked, he's lost all of the possible evidence he could go to the cops with. What does he do? He goes out into swinging London, and what does he do? He sees Vanessa Redgrave there, and she's at a Yardbirds concert. And what are the odds of that happening, that he's just going to happen to be driving at night, and he's going to see the woman who's Lady X in his life there? This has to be in some way, to me, wish fulfillment. Okay, he goes in there, they're playing, Beck smashes the guitar, does the Who thing, because Antonioni wanted the Who originally, and then out of he throws the broken guitar. He's the one who gets the value thing, runs out of it, and the minute something isn't wanted, he drops it. and then the rest of the film. So for me, this is sort of the passage through the gates, just like the star sequence was in 2001. Gordon, I don't know if anyone's ever made that connection, but what do you think of that? Because a lot of people have denigrated that whole Yardbird scene. I think it's a very vital scene.
I am going to show my cards. I have no idea who Yardbird is.
The band, they're the band.
I do not know the background of the scene. When I first saw it, it seemed very, very strange at this point in his life. At this point in the film, we're going to a concert. I was like, shouldn't he be like running from his life or something like that? Shouldn't he be? But, yeah, that was very, very strange to me. We did seem to have these kind of callbacks to the London nightlife, but I did not know why that scene was. I did think it was interesting that the photographer's sound didn't work. That he just smashed his guitar there. But I don't know why that scene was there.
Ian, what do you think about that scene? Because to me, as I said, at the end of it, we're almost in the land of Dr. Seuss. You know, I'm here, I'm not, I'm that. Verushka later at the party says she's in Paris when she's clearly in front of him. We're totally. So, what is your take on the whole Yardbird scene, Ian?
It's another interesting scene. Just prior to that, he sees Vanessa Redgrave on the street, and she disappears.
Yeah,
she mingles in the crowd, and she disappears. And my understanding is that he's going looking for her. He assumes she's disappeared down the alleyway that leads to the venue where the concert is. But he never finds her, he never sees her. And he goes into this concert with the Yardbirds, and there's this crowd that's just standing there, not moving at all. No one's dancing apart from Janet Street Porter and her friend. So yeah, like you say, it's all a bit surreal, a bit strange. You've got these, I mean, the Ricky Tick Club, which the venue was based on, was quite unique of its time, I believe, and the way they were kitted out with all the black walls and the posters, the very sort of contrasty posters everywhere. That was a unique thing, and Antonio obviously used that to give it a bit of a surreal edge, I think, because it was that much different to your normal concert venue.
Chadwick, I'm sorry. Are you done, Ian?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Chadwick, what is your take on that scene? Do you think, like I said, I think it's more important than a lot of people are giving credit.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. First of all, Ian's absolutely right that Vanessa Redgrave just sort of disappears. If you slow, I did this because I was curious, like, where does she go? Like, he clearly has her. You can't tell. Like, she disappears. And like if you watch the legs, it almost seems like the legs keep going, but she doesn't. I can't figure it out. I've watched it several times to figure out what happens to her. And so that adds to this idea that maybe this is all just wishful thinking, right? Because she literally just seems to disappear from the screen. And he goes in and they're all in a quasi-narcotic state listening to this music, right? And it's a very famous tune by the Yardbirds for Gordon here, right? It's Train Kept A-Rollin', except it's not with those lyrics because they couldn't get the copyright for the film for that. So they changed the Keith Relf or whatever, the lead singer changed the lyrics to be Stroll On, right? But it's still, you recognize it immediately, even though it's a very different arrangement than their famous recording from just a year before. I mean, the recording, I think, was 65, and they re-recorded it in October of 66 for the film. So just before it came out. And it's a very different, it's the only, as far as I know, some of the only film that has both Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. Together, because they weren't really in that band together for very long. Beck left, and of course Page kept the group at first, became the New Yardbirds, and then Zeppelin. At any rate, what's interesting to me is their behavior. Right, most of them are out of it, just sort of staring. But when he starts to tear apart the guitar and throws it into the crowd, they just rise up in this kind of ecstatic set of activities, right? Where they're all clawing for this thing, and of course he gets into the melee and pulls it out. Well, this is the 1966. This is a period. The 60s were a period of a revival of Nietzsche, and to me, this is the Dionysian moment, of the film, right? This idea of Dionysus losing yourself in the crowd, in this kind of immersion in the crowd, losing your sense of self, and yet at the same time being interested in this votive object, right? That's being torn apart. Sporagmos is the term from the Dionysian cults, right? It's the tearing apart of living things and then eating of the flesh, and that's the whole Hendrix and Who thing. There were various commentators at the time that related that to the Dionysian. Herbert Marcuse was working with ideas about the Apollonian and Dionysian in some of his works, which were very popular with the hippies and the New Left. So these were ideas that were sort of circulating at the time, and it seems to me that's exactly what's happening, is he's ripping that thing apart and throwing it as though it's this kind of ritual object or ritualized object that they then all vie for. But of course, once he leaves the venue, it doesn't matter anymore. No one wants it anymore. It doesn't have any meaning anymore out of that context. And so very quickly, it seems to me that this is, again, that disconnect and attempt to connect, right? So he has a lot of trouble connecting with other characters on a one-to-one basis. So here he's sort of immersed in the crowd and he feels something. This is another moment where he has a stake in something. He wants that neck, that guitar neck, until he gets out and no one wants it anymore, and then he doesn't want it.
Well, as I described it, I think that the Yardbirds scene is sort of akin to the Stargate passage in 2001, because at the end, it's almost like Alice through the Looking Glass, or as I said, Dr. Seuss. Everything seems to be negated then. As I said, he then later goes to a party. He can't get anyone to come and find the body. Verushka is there, but she's really in Paris. And then we get him wandering through the park, which would seemingly be the most dangerous place he could be if an actual conspiracy is there, and has done dirty deeds. Morning comes. It's almost like the Trevi fountain scene in La Dolce Vita too. Morning comes and everything sort of goes back to normal, except it doesn't for him, because then we get the mimes, we get the fake tennis match, and the very last image, of course, is famously the photographer. Poof, he's gone. So let me start with you, Chadwick. Again, that's sort of, to me, the spinning out. What does it mean there? I mean, to me, the film is at least as enigmatic in a different way than 2001's ending.
Yeah, and that scene with the mimes is I think a pivotal scene, and I have a different reading of it, I think, than Gordon presented earlier, which I don't know if it's complementary to that reading or not, but while I can understand that we're back to a kind of artificiality, we're also back to a kind of participation. I mean, as I've said a few times today, like, all of his conversations are negating. He ties back everything, right? The only time he feels passionate, it seems to me, is in the scene that we were just talking about in the club, where he wants that neck. But every other scene is about his mastery. It's when he's either taking the photographs or he's processing the photographs. That's when he's the most engaged, right? Even his attempt at seduction with Jane and so on, and of the two girls, he seems kind of bored even through part of it. He's trying to make a game out of it, but he only is half-heartedly in it. He's the most in it when he's doing things, when he's at mastery. Well, at the end, he's not, right? I mean, he's sort of participating, but it's their game. When he throws the ball back, he's throwing it back to their game. They're the ones that are doing things there, right? And it seems to me that this is that moment where he's trying, whether it's illusory or partly in his head or just playing someone else's game, he's going through the motions of trying to be involved, right? And we hear, once we can't see anymore, we hear the thwack of the tennis game, as though it's somehow materialized. We don't get to see that, and as Ian pointed out, right, this film is a lot about what we get to see and what we don't get to see, and what do we see that's valid and what don't we see that's valid, or what do we see that's not valid, rather. And here we have the other sense, right? The other important sense. All the senses are important, but the two that are thought of as being the intellectual senses are, of course, the eye and the ear, right? And so here we have the ear being brought into play with the thwack. And so just at this moment where he's engaged with something that he doesn't have mastery over, that he's not in charge of, he disappears, right? And I think you can read that in all sorts of different ways, that without his sense of being a photographer, he doesn't exist, or that we've gone so far through the looking glass that it's all just a washout on that beautiful lawn. Which, Ian, is it true that they painted that lawn? That Antonioni wasn't happy with the color of the grass, so they like painted it?
He painted lots of things. Painted fences, painted footpaths, pavements. I think some of the grass got painted green.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I think that where he disappears, I think, is supposed to be one of the patches that were painted, and you can kind of get this feeling of him being absorbed into the sort of the color, the wash of it all.
Gordon, what's your take on the final scenes there till his disappearance?
I mean, you can interpret lots of different ways, but I was saying if this tennis match is not happening, but it does happen. So what's real and what's not has been completely broken down at this point because of what's happened over the last 90 minutes. I don't think that the mimes are doing a real tennis game, but you hear a real tennis game, right? So I don't think, in a way, the joke's on us, isn't it? It's about how we're interpreting things. Where is our reality now? Because his has been fractured. So maybe by picking up this performed ball, or maybe by picking it up, he's kind of buying into the whole, well, I guess it's all what you make of it. Reality is what you make of it. Okay, here's your fake ball back. And as soon as he throws the fake ball back, maybe that's what triggers the tennis game. But it's kind of maybe a magical realism thing that's going on. I mean, this is Italian cinema. So I interpret it as he has completely given into this world of where things have broken down. Reality and fantasy may have broken down. That he's participating voluntarily in this world of the artificial.
Ian, what's your take on his disappearance at the end?
Yeah, this is this is hard to describe. There's so many possibilities here. What I did notice was that I think by picking up the imaginary ball and throwing it back, he almost becomes infected by that ball. He becomes imaginary himself. Because he's gone into their game. He's playing their game, if you like. And by doing that, because it isn't real, neither is he. That's just one interpretation. It's weird that the film loses its protagonist right at the very end, and you think, well, is any of this real, or is it just somebody else's imagination making the whole thing up?
So, Ian, let me just ask you finally 2 points. I'll go around the horn, but I'll start with you. What was your take on the performance of David Hemmings? Because he's really the only character that has any kind of an arc. I think it, for me, is one of the great performances, but it's one of the most understated great performances on film. And then a final as to why you think the film is great and others should watch it. So first Hemmings, and then why the film's great.
Hemmings. Yeah, he was an unknown when this was filmed. It was originally Terence Stamp, I think, was booked and contracted to do it. Why Antonioni changed that, I don't know. I think he saw him on the stage somewhere,
right,
and he changed his mind. And Terence Stamp was very aggrieved by it, I think, and believably so, understandably so. Hemmings, well, he went on to do great things as well. I mean, Charge the Light Brigade, other films he's done many. So you can see there's a talent there. I think Antonioni probably wanted someone who wasn't known very well, so that people couldn't put a typecasting view on it. And you can say, oh, well, he's been in this film, he's been in that film. This is how he acts. He wanted somebody new and fresh and different, perhaps. But I think it's a great performance, understated, like you say. Merely moving through the film in a strange arc that ends in his disappearance. Yeah, I think it's a great film. And very enigmatic. We're talking about it 56 years later. because no one really knows what it's about. There's lots of conjecture, lots of different opinions, and I guess we'll never really know what Antonioni had in mind. One, because not everything that was planned to be filmed was filmed. Not everything that was filmed was actually left in the final cut. So yeah, it's this enigmatic piece that people are talking about, and I think people should watch it because, one, it's Antonioni doing what Antonioni does, and like his other films, they're all watchable. They're all there to be talked about, discussed, analysed for what they are, which is artistic pieces that make you think, make you question, make you wonder. And that's it. They just keep giving questions rather than answering them.
So Gordon, what is your take on Hemmings's performance and why people should watch this movie?
Oh, I think David Hemmings, this is probably his best performance. Who has not felt like this character at some point in their life? I think the struggle he finds himself in, even if you're not, a handsome young photographer, we've all felt kind of bored and trapped in our lives and wanted something different. It's strange that this is an Italian filmmaker. David Hemmings would end up being in Argento's film called Deep Red. If you saw Deep Red, was also Deep Red, or Dario Argento made an Italian Galileo film, murder mystery, about this same plot called Boy with the Crystal Plumage. If you have seen that one, and if you want to see, Chad, you're a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you're a teacher, you have to see this David Hemmings film called Unmen, Withering, and Zygo. It's about a teacher who the students may have killed the teacher whose job he's taking over. It's about the classroom from hell. Unmen, Withering, and Zygo. Go see this movie. Anyway, 1971, I want to say. But who has not felt this way? Similar to the David Hemmings character. Who has not felt trapped? Who has not felt bored? Who has not felt they want to grasp onto something and get more there? The way I think he can describe his character, and we have heard him describe it, they're not my words, is that he is someone who looks but does not see. He's someone who looks, he's a voyeur, but it isn't until he discovers what he thinks is a murder that he actually begins to see. Dan, we did that one about La Dolce Vita. Don't you think there's some similarity between his character and the main character of La Dolce Vita? A little bit?
Yeah. They're both hedonists. They're both self-centered and whatnot. And both of them, in a sense, probably are going to end up doomed in their lives. But
they kind of work in the same business.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a little bit of a line between those two Italian filmmakers, Fellini and Antonioni.
And finally, Chadwick, what's your take on Hemmings and then the film itself, why you would recommend it?
Well, Hemmings has such an interesting approach to this film in so many ways. The thing that stands out for me is the manicness of it. When he answers the phone and he leaps under and bumps his head against the wall, right? Like when he's following her up the footpath to the knoll, and he jumps up, sort of skipping, he jumps up and clicks his heels together, right? So all these sort of manic moments where you can feel it's an interesting performance of ennui, right? Because if he's experiencing ennui, he's doing everything he can to jerk himself out of it, right? The sort of pretending to be manic and fun and in it and yelling when he feels like yelling and all the rest, and yet we get the sense that underneath it all he's bored and disaffected, right? And therefore kind of typical Antonioni character. I mean, at least since the trilogy, and really even before that with Le Amiche and so on, this idea of as the protagonist at the end of Red Desert says it to a foreign sailor who can't understand what she's saying. She says, "We're all separate." You know, we're all so terribly separate. And this is another example of that I think Hemmings does a good job of, right? Because all of these gestures are an attempt to be seen, an attempt to be affable. I mean, the way he is with the people at Rag Week, he gives them money, right? And he lets the woman in the protest put the placard in his car. He has this kind of affability to him. And yet at the same time, he's constantly communicating that he doesn't care about anyone else. All of his conversations go nowhere. They all break down. The reason to see the film, especially if you're interested in Antonioni, is Antonioni in an interview said that this film's not about man's relationship to man, but rather man's relationship to reality. And I think that's maybe the key reason to see the film, because so many of his other films are really about a person's relationship to other people. That's part of what Monica Vietti's character means in Red Desert when she says we're all so separate. And she's looking for ways to connect. And I think he is too, but he's looking for ways to connect not just to other people, but to some sense of a bearing in the world, some sense of reality. And the more you work with that reality, the less clear it becomes. And so, and this goes back to what Ian was saying, you can't put information in these blow-ups that isn't there. So if the information is coming, it's coming from him. It's not coming from the process. Right? So this idea of trying to follow reality down this rabbit hole, tracing the leg, as Bill, the painter, says, right? I see the leg and then I continue to pursue it. And that's the word he uses, pursue, right? That reality is something that needs to be pursued. But as we're pursuing it, as we're looking at this form of reality and trying to see what it all means, we're the ones that are adding content, or we're taking it from others, which is what he tries to do with the guitar and what he tries to do with the fake tennis match, right? So this idea of our attempt to grapple with reality by adding content to the reality, that, to me, that's the compelling reason to see the film, because it does it so well. My little summary of it is not the same thing as seeing it unfold, obviously.
Well, I will link to your page, Chadwick. I'll link Ian. I think you have a Twitter page, and Gordon, I'll link to your YouTube page. One final comment from me, though, as you were speaking, Chadwick, it struck me that this film, in a sense, is sort of like a larger, extended version, opposite, a negative, of the little beach scene with the little girl in Red Desert. In Red Desert, everything is bright and beautiful. Everything seems idyllic. And then at the end, there's the singing of things, and Monica Vitti talking to her son who's trying to stay home from school or something by pretending to be sick, says, Mama, what was singing? Everything. Here, it's like at the end, what was real? Nothing. You know,
Yeah.
it's almost as if it's a point counterpoint. But anyway, I want to thank all of you for spending some time speaking about this great film, and I really appreciate it.